It was late in the evening when Adrian Cole, a billionaire known across the business world for his unmatched empire of luxury resorts and technology firms, found himself in a situation he never imagined. He had been driving alone along a quiet country road, far from the glowing lights of the city, hoping to escape the endless calls, the meetings, and the flashing cameras that followed him everywhere. The day had been unusually heavy. A boardroom argument, rumours in the press, and his own gnawing sense of loneliness had driven him to take this unplanned drive. The air was crisp, and the silence of the countryside wrapped around him like a blanket he hadn't felt in years. But peace turned quickly into trouble. As he navigated a bend, his car shuddered, sputtered, and then rolled to a dead stop. He tried to restart it, frowning at the dashboard filled with blinking lights. This wasn't just any car. It was a handcrafted European machine worth more than most houses. It wasn't supposed to break down. Yet here he was, in the middle of nowhere, with no signal on his phone and no team of assistants rushing to solve his problem. It was late in the evening when Adrian Cole, a billionaire known across the business world for his unmatched empire of luxury resorts and technology firms, found himself in a situation he never imagined. He had been driving alone along a quiet country road, far from the glowing lights of the city, hoping to escape the endless calls, the meetings, and the flashing cameras that followed him everywhere. The day had been unusually heavy. A boardroom argument, rumours in the press, and his own gnawing sense of loneliness had driven him to take this unplanned drive. The air was crisp, and the silence of the countryside wrapped around him like a blanket he hadn't felt in years. But peace turned quickly into trouble. As he navigated a bend, his car shuddered, sputtered, and then rolled to a dead stop. He tried to restart it, frowning at the dashboard filled with blinking lights. This wasn't just any car. It was a handcrafted European machine, worth more than most houses. It wasn't supposed to break down. Yet here he was, in the middle of nowhere, with no signal on his phone and no team of assistants rushing to solve his problem. Adrian stepped out, frustrated, the gravel crunching under his polished shoes. He pulled his coat tighter as the evening breeze picked up. For the first time in a long time, he realized how dependent he had become on others fixing his problems. Without his driver, without his advisors, without his assistants, he was just a man standing by a useless piece of metal. Cars passed occasionally, but none slowed down. To them, he was just another stranded traveller on a forgotten road. He leaned against the car, staring up at the fading light of the sky, feeling something unfamiliar vulnerability. It wasn't the kind that came from losing a deal or a fortune. It was the raw, unsettling feeling of being powerless in a world that didn't care who he was. And it was in that moment, just as he began to wonder how long he would be stranded, that the sound of an old pickup truck approached from the distance, its headlights cutting through the dusk. Inside that truck was someone whose life couldn't have been further from his own, a poor but determined young woman whose path was about to collide with his, in a way neither of them could have imagined. Under the dim light of her flashlight, the young mechanic leaned closer into the sleek machine, her hands steady and sure despite the intimidating complexity of the luxury car before her. For her, this wasn't about price tags or prestige. It was just another machine with moving parts, something she could puzzle through, like she had done countless times in her tiny shop back in town. The smell of oil and metal was familiar to her, almost comforting, though to Adrian it felt entirely out of place beside the polished leather seats and gleaming chrome that defined his world. Adrian stood silently, arms folded, watching her work. For once in his life, he had no control over the situation. Money couldn't summon a repair crew. His influence couldn't bend the broken car into cooperation, and his reputation meant nothing on this forgotten road. All he had was this stranger who had stopped her own evening to help a man she didn't know. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. She tugged at connections, tapped on the housing of the battery, and tested cables with an expertise that came from years of practice, not formal schooling. Adrian noticed how she muttered under her breath, half to herself and half to the machine, as if coaxing it back to life. It was a language foreign to him, yet it carried a kind of music that was oddly reassuring. Finally, she pulled back, wiping the sweat and grease from her forehead with the back of her arm. "It's not as bad as it looks," she said, her tone casual, almost cheerful. "A loose connection, probably from the rough roads. You'll be able to drive it once I tighten it up. Give me a minute." Adrian blinked, surprised. To him, the sudden stop had felt catastrophic, like the car had betrayed him at the worst possible time. Yet here she was, fixing it with tools that looked older than the car itself, her determination outshining the machine's stubbornness. When she finally asked him to try starting the car again, Adrian slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. To his astonishment, the engine roared back to life with a deep, steady hum, as if it had never faltered at all. Relief washed over him, but it wasn't just relief for the machine, it was awe for the woman who had made it happen. He stepped out, words faltering as he tried to express his gratitude. But before he could, she shrugged again, almost brushing off his thanks. "Don't mention it. People get stuck all the time out here. You just happened to be the one tonight." Her humility struck him deeply. She had done for him what no one else had been willing to. She stopped, helped, and asked for nothing in return. No mention of payment, no recognition of who he was, no attempt to benefit from the situation. Just kindness. Pure, uncalculated kindness. For Adrian, who lived in a world where every favour had a price and every gesture was tangled in expectations, her sincerity felt almost unreal. It left him standing there in silence, realizing that this small act on a lonely road might be the first genuine human connection he'd felt in years. And though she didn't know it, that simple kindness was the spark that would ignite a story neither of them had seen coming. The young mechanic closed the hood with a firm push, brushing her hands on a rag she pulled from her back pocket. The job was simple to her, just another repair, another night helping someone who needed it. To her, it didn't matter that the car she touched was worth more than her entire shop, and probably her entire life savings combined. Machines were machines, and she had built her reputation in the small town nearby on that principle alone. But to Adrian, it was more than a repair. It was a humbling reminder that, for all his wealth and status, he was still just a man whose car could break down on a forgotten road. And that sometimes, help came from the most unexpected hands. He watched her carefully as she finished tidying up, his curiosity gnawing at him. Who was this woman who had shown him more sincerity in a single hour than some of his closest business partners had in years? "You must do this often," Adrian finally said, trying to bridge the silence. She gave a small laugh, shaking her head. "Not always for cars like yours," she teased, glancing at the gleaming vehicle beside them. "Most folks around here drive trucks that have seen better days. I do what I can. Keeps the lights on, you know." It was such a casual statement, but it hit Adrian harder than he expected. Keeps the lights on. That was her measure of success survival, not expansion. Hard work, not profit margins. He realized then how far removed his world was from hers. He thought of his towering skyscrapers, his sprawling estates, his endless investments. And here was someone who measured her life by whether she could keep the power running in her modest home. Something stirred in him, a mix of admiration and discomfort. For years, people had approached him for what he could give them: money, opportunities, influence. Yet, she didn't ask. She didn't even seem interested. She was already packing away her tools, as if she were ready to leave without another word. "Wait," he said, more abruptly than he intended. She paused, raising an eyebrow. "You don't know who I am, do you?" he asked carefully, almost unsure if he wanted her to answer. Her expression was puzzled, then lightly amused. "Should I?" Adrian blinked. In his world, his name carried weight that opened doors before he even knocked. People lined up to meet him, to get a handshake or a favour. And here was someone standing in front of him, grease still on her hands, asking the simplest question, "Should I?" For the first time in years, he realised he was invisible, and oddly, he liked it. "No," he said finally, shaking his head. "No, you don't need to." She gave a small shrug, unconcerned. "Good. Then you're just another driver to me." That single sentence lodged itself in Adrian's chest. Just another driver. No titles, no wealth, no power, just a man stranded by the side of the road. And to her, that was enough reason to help. It was in that moment that Adrian understood something profound. He had spent years surrounded by people who admired the billionaire, but perhaps not the man beneath the title. And here, by sheer chance, he had met someone who didn't see the billionaire at all. She saw a person in need and nothing more. And that simple truth felt like the most stunning revelation of all. The engine purred steadily, proof that her work had held. Adrian Stotu. Adrian couldn't stop thinking about the mechanic after his visit to her shop. Every detail replayed in his mind, the way her hands moved with precision over a stubborn engine. The steadiness of her voice when she explained the most technical of problems, the pride in her eyes when she finished a job well done. It fascinated him. Because in his world, success often came from boardroom strategies, stock reports, and calculated risks. Yet here was a woman who built her life with nothing more than determination, skill, and courage. She, however, was not as easily swayed. After Adrian's visit, she found herself restless, replaying the oddness of the encounter. A billionaire in her tiny, dusty shop, it didn't make sense. Men like him didn't cross paths with women like her unless they wanted something, and that thought unsettled her. She had seen enough broken promises and false kindnesses to know better than to trust too quickly. Still, she couldn't ignore the fact that Adrian had looked at her differently, not with pity, not with amusement, but with genuine respect. It was rare, almost foreign, to be regarded that way, especially by someone from his world. The following week, Adrian stopped by again, claiming he was just passing through, but she wasn't fooled. "You don't just pass through here," she teased, arms crossed. "The city's 2 hours away." "Caught," Adrian smiled, uncharacteristically sheepish. "Maybe I just like the coffee around here. Or maybe you're bored of your billion-dollar life," she countered. His chuckle was soft, but his eyes were serious. "Maybe I am." That admission hung in the air between them. She felt a small tug at her heart, but she quickly pushed it aside. Respect was one thing. Letting herself get swept into his orbit was another. Still, as they worked side by side that afternoon, her teaching him how to change a tire, him fumbling with the jack and laughing at his own clumsiness, something unspoken grew. And though neither dared to say it aloud, both felt the same quiet truth. This was no longer just about a broken car. This was about two lives brushing against each other, sparking something neither had expected. When Adrian returned to the city, the glittering skyline welcomed him as it always had. Yet something felt different. The tall towers of glass and steel that once represented success now seemed hollow, their reflections cold against the night sky. His penthouse apartment, with its sweeping views and polished elegance, should have been comforting, but instead it felt sterile, silent, and strangely suffocating. The next morning, he stepped into a boardroom filled with polished shoes, expensive watches, and carefully rehearsed smiles. His executives were mid-discussion about a new acquisition, another company about to be absorbed into his empire. It was the kind of meeting Adrian had presided over countless times, where numbers, graphs, and strategies ruled the conversation. Yet for the first time, he found himself distracted. As one of the directors droned on about projected profits, Adrian's mind drifted back to the mechanic's shop. He could still smell the oil and hear the faint scratch of a wrench against metal. He remembered the way she wiped her hands on her worn rag, unconcerned about appearances, focused only on the work at hand. She had no fortune, no spotlight, no audience, but she carried herself with a dignity that rivaled any CEO he had ever met. "Adrian, your thoughts?" one of his executives prompted. He blinked, realizing he hadn't heard a single word of the proposal. Clearing his throat, he muttered something about reviewing the details later. But even as the meeting went on, he felt restless, almost irritated by the endless pursuit of more. More money, more power, more acquisitions. The words no longer stirred the excitement they once had. That evening, he attended a gala, a shimmering event filled with chandeliers, gowns, and endless champagne. Socialites circled around him, eager for his attention, dropping hints about business deals or social connections. A woman in a diamond necklace leaned close, whispering that she admired his unmatched taste in cars. Adrian forced a polite smile, but his mind wandered again, recalling instead the mechanic's laughter when he struggled to loosen a stubborn bolt. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Here, everything was polished, curated, and wrapped in pretense. Yet he missed the rough edges of the garage, the smell of rubber, and the unguarded honesty of the woman who had no reason to impress him. Later that night, alone in his study, Adrian stared at his reflection in the glass window. For years, he had defined himself by wealth, by the empire he built from the ground up. And yet, the more he thought of her, the mechanic with dirt under her nails and light in her eyes, the more he realized that somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with something real. For the first time, he admitted it to himself. The life he had wasn't enough anymore. And as the city glittered below him, Adrian knew he would find himself back in that small shop soon, not because he needed a car fixed, but because, in her presence, he had felt something he hadn't felt in years. Something he couldn't buy, negotiate, or control. Something that felt a lot like freedom. When Adrian returned to the city, the glittering skyline welcomed him as it always had. Yet something felt different. The tall towers of glass and steel that once represented success now seemed hollow, their reflections cold against the night sky. His penthouse apartment, with its sweeping views and polished elegance, should have been comforting, but instead it felt sterile, silent, and strangely suffocating. The next morning, he stepped into a boardroom filled with polished shoes, expensive watches, and carefully rehearsed smiles. His executives were mid-discussion about a new acquisition, another company about to be absorbed into his empire. It was the kind of meeting Adrian had presided over countless times, where numbers, graphs, and strategies ruled the conversation. Yet for the first time, he found himself distracted. As one of the directors droned on about projected profits, Adrian's mind drifted back to the mechanic's shop. He could still smell the oil and hear the faint scratch of a wrench against metal. He remembered the way she wiped her hands on her worn rag, unconcerned about appearances, focused only on the work at hand. She had no fortune, no spotlight, no audience, but she carried herself with a dignity that rivaled any CEO he had ever met. "Adrian, your thoughts?" one of his executives prompted. He blinked, realizing he hadn't heard a single word of the proposal. Clearing his throat, he muttered something about reviewing the details later. But even as the meeting went on, He felt restless, almost irritated by the endless pursuit of more. More money, more power, more acquisitions. The words no longer stirred the excitement they once had. That evening, he attended a gala, a shimmering event filled with chandeliers, gowns, and endless champagne. Socialites circled around him, eager for his attention, dropping hints about business deals or social connections. A woman in a diamond necklace leaned close, whispering that she admired his unmatched taste in cars. Adrian forced a polite smile, but his mind wandered again, recalling instead the mechanic's laughter when he struggled to loosen a stubborn bolt. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Here, everything was polished, curated, and wrapped in pretense. Yet he missed the rough edges of the garage, the smell of rubber, and the unguarded honesty of the woman who had no reason to impress him. Later that night, alone in his study, Adrian stared at his reflection in the glass window. For years, he had defined himself by wealth, by the empire he built from the ground up. And yet, the more he thought of her, the mechanic with dirt under her nails and light in her eyes, the more he realized that somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with something real. For the first time, he admitted it to himself. The life he had wasn't enough anymore. And as the city glittered below him, Adrian knew he would find himself back in that small shop. Soon, not because he needed a car fixed, but because, in her presence, he had felt something he hadn't felt in years. Something he couldn't buy, negotiate, or control. Something that felt a lot like freedom. That's part 8 يواحد دنج ثلاثة يواثنان ألفان ومئتين characters. Would you like me to move right into part 9, An Invitation Declined, where Adrian tries to bring her into his world, but she refuses? You said, yes. ChatGPT said, perfect. Let's keep the story flowing. Here's the next chapter, expanded and rich with detail. UA Deng 3, Utwo 2000, 200 characters. Title: How a Billionaire Fell in Love with a Poor Female Mechanic Who Helped Him in Distress. Part 9. An Invitation Declined. The next week, Adrian made the drive back to the little town. His luxury car, now working perfectly thanks to her repairs, seemed oddly out of place on the quiet streets lined with old brick shops and faded signs. Yet he didn't care about the stairs. He was here for one reason. He found her bent over the hood of a rusted pickup, grease streaking her cheek, strands of hair escaping her messy ponytail. She glanced up when she heard his footsteps and raised an eyebrow. Didn't expect to see you again so soon. Don't tell me that car's already broken down. Adrian chuckled. No, it's running smoother than ever. Actually, I came to ask if you'd like to have dinner with me tonight. She froze for a moment, her wrench in hand. Then she straightened slowly, giving him a skeptical look. Dinner? With you? Yes, he said simply. There's a restaurant in the city, one of the best. I think you'd like it. Her laugh was short, almost bitter. One of the best? Adrian, do you have any idea how much a single meal there probably costs? That's For weeks, Adrian had kept to her world, her small town shop, her quiet streets, her simple life. But one evening, after another long day spent tinkering with the old truck, he looked at her with an unusual seriousness. There's something I want to ask, he said. Would you come with me to the city? Just once. I'd like you to see my world the way I've been seeing yours. She froze, hands stilling on the toolbox. The very thing she'd tried to avoid, stepping into his glittering, unfamiliar universe, was now staring her in the face. I don't know if that's a good idea, she said quietly. Adrian's tone softened. I understand your hesitation, but you've trusted me enough to share your life, your work, your pride. I want to do the same. Not to impress you, just to show you who I am when I'm not here. After a long pause, she finally nodded, though doubt tugged at her heart. The following Saturday, she found herself in his car, watching the skyline rise like a crown of glass and steel. The city buzzed with energy horns blaring, lights flashing, people rushing by in tailored suits. Everything about it screamed speed, wealth, and power. She felt small, out of place, and terribly aware of the grease still beneath her fingernails, no matter how much she had scrubbed. Adrian noticed her stiffness. "It's just a city," he said gently. "Don't let it scare you." He took her to a quieter place, a rooftop garden atop one of his buildings. From there, the city stretched endlessly in every direction, yet the space itself was serene, filled with flowers and benches. He sat with her, letting the silence speak before finally saying, "This is where I come when I need to breathe. Most people think I thrive in the noise, but truth is, I'm happiest when I escape it." She glanced at him, surprised. For the first time, she saw how even a man with everything could feel trapped. Later that evening, however, her fears resurfaced. At a private dinner with a few of Adrian's associates, the contrast between their lives became painfully clear. Conversation buzzed with investments, acquisitions, and names she didn't recognize. She stayed quiet, feeling invisible, until one woman, perfectly dressed, leaned closer and asked with thinly veiled disdain, "And what do you do, dear?" The mechanic's cheeks burned, but before she could stumble over a reply, Adrian spoke firmly. "She runs her own business, a mechanic shop, and she's one of the best at what she does." The table fell silent. Some smiled politely, others exchanged glances, but Adrian's eyes stayed steady on hers. It was the first time she realized he wasn't ashamed of her. He was proud, and though doubt still lingered, a flicker of something warm spread in her chest. For once, in his world, she didn't feel entirely alone. The ride back from the city was quieter than either of them expected. She sat with her arms folded, staring out the window, the glow of the street lamps flashing across her face. Adrian gripped the wheel, his jaw tight, sensing the storm building but unsure how to stop it. Finally, she spoke. "Do you even realize how different we are?" Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight heavier than anger. Adrian glanced at her. "Different, yes, but nothing," she cut in, turning toward him. "I spent the whole evening feeling like I didn't belong. Those people, they looked at me like I was a charity case, like I was someone you pulled off the roadside for entertainment." He braked a little harder than necessary at a red light, his frustration slipping through. "Is that really what you think of me? That I would parade you around just to show off?" She faltered, but didn't back down. "I don't know what to think. Maybe you didn't mean to, but that's how it felt. You have a world full of money, respect, power, and I fix engines in a shop with peeling paint. You can't tell me that gap doesn't matter." Adrian's voice dropped low, strained with emotion. "I brought you there because I wanted you to see all of me, not just the part you're comfortable with. I wanted you to understand that you don't need to change a thing to stand beside me." She shook her head, her chest aching. "That's easy for you to say. You'll never have to worry about bills, or choosing between food and rent, or whether someone will take you seriously because of grease under your nails. You don't live in my world, Adrian. You visit it, and when you leave, you go back to something I'll never touch." The light turned green, but for a moment, he didn't move. His hands clenched the steering wheel, a war playing out behind his eyes. He wanted to argue, to convince her she was wrong, but the truth was, he couldn't erase the gap she felt. When they finally reached her shop, she opened the door before he could say another word. She stepped out, her face pale under the neon sign. "Thank you for showing me your world," she said quietly. "But maybe that's all this should be, two different worlds colliding for a while. Nothing more." And with that, she walked inside, leaving Adrian alone in the silence of his car. For the first time since they met, he felt powerless. Not because of wealth or influence, but because the one thing he wanted most couldn't be bought, it had to be chosen. And right now, she wasn't sure if she could choose him. The days after their argument stretched heavy and silent. Adrian didn't call, and she didn't reach out either. Both of them, stubborn in their own ways, believed space was the only answer, even if that space felt like a canyon. But fate had other plans. One evening, dark clouds rolled across the horizon, swallowing the last streaks of sunlight. The mechanic had just finished closing her shop when the storm hit. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and the rain came down in sheets, flooding the streets faster than the drains could swallow it. She hurried to lock everything down, but as she stepped outside, she saw a car stuck at the far end of the street. Water was already rising around its tires. Without hesitation, she splashed through the current to help. But as she drew closer, her heart jolted. It was Adrian's sleek black car, now useless against the floodwaters. He was inside, struggling with the door, his suit already damp. "Adrian!" she shouted over the roar of the storm. He looked up, relief flashing in his eyes, before another wave of water surged against the car. She waded through, tugging hard at the handle until it gave way. "Come on," she urged, pulling him out just as the water crept higher. They stumbled together through the flood, finally reaching the shelter of her shop. Both drenched, both panting, they slammed the door shut against the storm. For a moment, neither spoke, the thunder outside filling the silence between them. Adrian finally broke it. "I didn't know where else to go," he admitted, his voice raw. "When the roads started closing, I thought of here. I thought of you." Her chest tightened. The bitterness from their last conversation was still there, but now it tangled with something else, something stronger. She grabbed a towel, tossed it to him, and muttered, "You always seem to show up when you're broken down." To her surprise, he laughed softly, shaking his head. "Maybe because you're the only one who knows how to put me back together." The storm raged on, water lapping against the door, but inside the shop, the air felt different. Stripped of his polished image, soaked and vulnerable, Adrian wasn't a billionaire tonight. He was just a man who had run out of control, who needed shelter, who needed her. And for the first time, she let herself admit it, she needed him too. The morning after the storm, the town was buzzing. Streets were littered with branches, shop signs hung crooked, and the sound of cleanup echoed everywhere. At her garage, she swept water out of the entrance, grateful the damage hadn't been worse. She didn't expect to see Adrian again so soon, but before noon, sleek black cars pulled up outside. At first, she frowned, thinking it was customers, but when Adrian stepped out, followed by a handful of reporters, her heart skipped. "What are you doing?" she hissed under her breath as he strode up, looking every bit the polished billionaire once more. Cameras clicked, microphones bobbed. Adrian didn't flinch. Instead, he turned to the reporters and spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the street. "I came here today to say something that I should have said a long time ago. This woman," he gestured toward her, "is not a project. She is not a charity. She is the most skilled, resilient, and honest person I know. And she saved me not once, but countless times." Her eyes widened, heat rushing to her face as the crowd murmured. "One night, when my car broke down, she helped me without asking for anything. And since then, she has reminded me what real strength looks like. I owe her more than gratitude. I owe her respect." He paused, then added firmly, "And I don't care how different our worlds may look, she belongs beside me, if she'll have me." The reporters erupted with questions, flashes of cameras blinding her. She stared at him, stunned, torn between anger at being thrust into the spotlight and the deep ache of his sincerity. She pulled him aside, her voice sharp but trembling. "Adrian, are you insane? You just made me the talk of the town." He smiled faintly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Good. Now no one can ever make you feel small again. I wanted the world to see who you are through my eyes." Her breath caught. The same man who once seemed untouchable had just placed his reputation on the line for her, publicly and proudly. The same man who lived in a world of control had chosen to let go for her sake. The cameras kept flashing, but for a moment she didn't hear them. She just saw him, the man who refused to let her hide, who believed in her even when she couldn't believe in herself. For 3,